I never thought a single moment of misplaced loyalty would detonate my marriage less than 72 hours after giving birth. But here I am, Natalie Evans, 31, sitting alone in our townhouse with my newborn daughter while my husband's belongings are gone and divorce papers are already being drawn up. They say hindsight is 20/20. Looking back now, I can trace the fault lines that were forming long before my daughter ever took her first breath. The cracks I either couldn't see or refused to acknowledge until everything shattered beyond repair. It started 4 years ago when I reconnected with Julian at a mutual friend's wedding. We dated throughout college, that intense, formative kind of relationship where you discover parts of yourself through another person. We'd broken up amicably when our career paths diverged. Him to San Francisco for a tech startup, me staying in Chicago for law school. We promised to stay friends, and unlike most ex-couples who make that empty vow, we actually managed it. When I met Ethan a year later, Julian had become a comfortable fixture in my life. A text message here, a phone call there, occasional meetups when he was in town. Ethan was everything Julian wasn't. Structured where Julian was spontaneous, steadfast where Julian was mercurial. Planning 5 steps ahead where Julian lived moment to moment. I fell for Ethan's stability, his unwavering certainty about us. 6 months into dating, he took me to dinner and laid out a 5-year plan that included marriage, career milestones, and eventually children. I was captivated by his vision, by his absolute confidence in our future together. When I told Julian about Ethan's proposal a year later, he congratulated me with genuine warmth, but asked, "Are you sure he's not too predictable for you, Nat?" I dismissed his concern with a laugh. Maybe predictable is exactly what I need. The first signs of tension appeared during our engagement party. Julian had flown in specially, bringing an extravagant gift and charming everyone, including my parents. Halfway through the evening, I found myself in the kitchen with Julian, doubled over with laughter at some inside joke while Ethan watched from the doorway, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Later that night, Ethan asked quietly, "Do you always light up like that around him?" "Like what?" I replied, genuinely puzzled. "Like he's the sun and you're a plant that's been kept in the dark." I rolled my eyes and told him he was imagining things. Julian was just an old friend, nothing more. But as our wedding approached, Ethan's comments became more frequent. He noticed how quickly I answered Julian's texts, how long our phone calls lasted, how often Julian's name appeared in my stories. I accused him of being insecure and controlling. "I'm not controlling, Natalie," he said during one particularly heated argument. "I'm asking for respect. There are boundaries in a marriage, and your relationship with Julian crosses them." "You don't get to dictate my friendships," I fired back. "Julian has been in my life longer than you have." The hurt that flashed across Ethan's face should have been a warning, but I was too stubborn to see it. We got married on a perfect autumn day. Julian was there, of course, though not in the wedding party. A concession I'd made to Ethan without admitting it was a concession at all. When Julian caught the garter, accidentally, he claimed. I laughed it off. Ethan didn't. Our first year of marriage was an adjustment period. Ethan worked long hours at his investment firm, often coming home after I was already asleep. I threw myself into my cases at the law firm, building a reputation as someone who would put in whatever hours necessary to win. Our schedules rarely aligned, but we made it work. We were building something together, even if the foundation occasionally trembled. Then, Julian announced he was moving back to Chicago. His company is opening an office here, I told Ethan over dinner. Isn't that great? He won't have to crash on our couch when he visits anymore. Ethan set down his fork. And how often do you anticipate him visiting once he lives 20 minutes away? I should have recognized the warning in his tone, should have reassured him, should have acknowledged his feelings. Instead, I got defensive. Why are you still threatened by him? We've been married for almost a year, Ethan. Don't you trust me at all? I trust you, he said carefully. I don't trust the situation. I don't trust the way he looks at you when you're not watching. And I definitely don't trust the way you drop everything when he calls. You're being ridiculous, I snapped, and the conversation ended there, unresolved like so many others. Julian's return to Chicago coincided with a surprise discovery. I was pregnant. The timing wasn't planned. We'd talked about waiting another year or two. Ethan was momentarily thrown, but quickly embraced the news, downloading parenting apps and ordering books before I'd even processed the reality of it myself. We'll make this work, he said, his hand on my still, flat stomach. We'll adjust the 5-year plan. When I told Julian over coffee, his reaction was different. Wow, Nat, that's big. Are you ready for this? I mean, your career is just taking off. It wasn't planned, I admitted. But Ethan is excited, and I'm adjusting to the idea. Julian reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Well, I'm here for you, whatever you need. As my pregnancy progressed, Julian became increasingly present. He'd stop by with ginger tea when morning sickness hit me hard. He'd text to check how my appointments went. He volunteered to assemble the nursery furniture when Ethan was swamped with a major client project. I can handle it, Ethan had said, visibly annoyed at Julian's offer. I don't need another man building my child's crib. Don't be so territorial, I shot back. Julian's just trying to help. The word territorial hung between us, sharp and accusatory. Looking back, I can see how it diminished Ethan's legitimate feelings to mere possessiveness. By my 3rd trimester, Julian had somehow become my unofficial pregnancy partner. When Ethan missed a childbirth class due to work, Julian stepped in. When I had a 3 a.m. craving for specific ice cream, Julian was at our door with 3 different brands, just to be safe. When I complained about Ethan working late, Julian was there to listen, validating my frustrations instead of challenging them. The breaking point came 2 weeks before my due date. Ethan and I were hosting a small dinner party, the last one before the baby's arrival. Julian arrived early to help set up, bringing an expensive bottle of non-alcoholic champagne for the mom-to-be. Throughout the evening, he hovered near me, refilling my water glass, adjusting cushions behind my back, documenting everything with his camera for the baby book. After our guests left, Ethan was unusually quiet as we cleaned up. We need to talk about Julian, he finally said. I sighed dramatically. Not this again. Yes, this again. Ethan's voice was firm. Because it's becoming absurd, Natalie. He's acting like he's the father of this baby. He's acting like your partner, and you're letting him. He's being supportive, I countered. Something you could learn from. Ethan set down the dish he was washing, suds dripping onto the floor. I work 60-hour weeks to make sure we can provide everything our child will need. I've gone to every important appointment. I've read every book. I painted the nursery 3 times until you were happy with the color. But because I'm not bringing you ice cream at 3 a.m., I'm not supportive. That's not what I meant. What did you mean then? Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you want Julian in this marriage as much as you want me. The argument escalated until Ethan finally asked, if you had to choose right now between Julian being in your life or our marriage working, what would you choose? That's not fair, I protested. You can't make me choose between my friend and my husband. Ethan looked at me for a long moment. I think you just did. The next day, Ethan was coldly civil. The day after that, my water broke 4 days ahead of schedule. Everything happened fast after that. Ethan was at work across town, stuck in a meeting he couldn't immediately leave. I called Julian without hesitation, and he arrived in minutes, threw my hospital bag in his car, and drove me to Northwestern Memorial with practiced calm. By the time we reached the hospital, contractions were coming strong and fast. First-time labor wasn't supposed to progress this quickly, the nurses said, but my body had apparently missed that memo. Julian stayed by my side, coaching me through breathing, advocating with nurses, fetching ice chips, and holding my hand through each wave of pain. I was 7 centimeters dilated by the time Ethan finally burst into the room, looking harried and terrified. I'm here, he announced breathlessly. I'm here, Nat. Julian didn't move from his position next to me, his hand still firmly in mine. The nurse looked between the 2 men uncertainly. The doctor will be in soon to check your progress, she said. Looks like this baby isn't waiting for anyone. The next few hours blurred together in a haze of pain and medical jargon. Both men stayed, creating an awkward triangle of support that I was in too much distress to address. Julian knew exactly where to press on my back to relieve pressure. Ethan kept getting instructions from the nurses on how to help. At 2:17 a.m., after 20 hours of labor, my daughter entered the world with a powerful cry that belied her tiny size. The doctor announced, "It's a girl," and the room filled with the reverent silence that follows new life. Would Dad like to cut the cord? The doctor asked, looking between the 2 men. I'm the father, Ethan said quietly, stepping forward. After the initial medical checks, a nurse approached with my swaddled daughter. Who wants to have the first hold? She asked. This was the moment that destroyed everything, though I couldn't see it then through my exhausted, hormone-flooded haze. Without thinking, I gestured toward Julian. Let him hold her first. He's been here from the start. The nurse hesitated, looking at Ethan, whose face had drained of all color. It's fine, I added, not registering the damage I was doing. Julian, come meet my daughter. The silence in the room was deafening as the nurse reluctantly placed my newborn in Julian's arms. He looked down at her with wonder and whispered, She's perfect, Nat. She looks just like you. I smiled tiredly, feeling some strange sense of completion seeing him hold her. It wasn't until I glanced at Ethan that I realized something was terribly wrong. He had backed up against the wall, his face a mask of devastation and fury. His hands were shaking. Ethan, I said, finally noticing his distress. What's wrong? He looked at me like I was a stranger. What's wrong? He repeated, his voice barely controlled. You just gave our daughter to another man to hold before me, her father. The fog in my mind began to clear, and with it came the first pinpricks of understanding. "You'll get to hold her next," I said weakly. "It's not a big deal." "Not a big deal," Ethan echoed, his voice hollow. "My wife just gave my firstborn child to her ex-boyfriend to hold before me, and it's not a big deal." Julian, finally sensing the gravity of the situation, tried to hand the baby to Ethan. "Here, man. I didn't realize—" "Don't," Ethan cut him off, his voice ice cold. "Just don't." He looked at me one more time, a look so filled with hurt and betrayal that it physically pained me. "I need some air," he said, and walked out. "He's just emotional," I told the confused nurse and uncomfortable Julian. "He'll be back." But he didn't come back, not for hours. When he finally returned, he was different, distant, formal, going through the motions of new fatherhood, like an actor who had studied the role but felt none of it. Julian finally left, but the damage was done. When a hospital photographer came to take newborn photos, Ethan declined to be in them. When the pediatrician came to discuss care instructions, Ethan took meticulous notes but asked no questions. When it was time to fill out the birth certificate, he hesitated almost imperceptibly before signing his name. We went home the next day to an apartment that felt suddenly alien. Ethan was polite, helpful even, but completely withdrawn emotionally. He would hold our daughter, change her, feed her from the bottles of breast milk I pumped, but there was a mechanical quality to his actions. When Julian sent flowers and a gift basket, Ethan placed them wordlessly on the counter and walked out of the room. "We need to talk about what happened," I finally said on our third night home, after the baby had fallen asleep. "Which part?" Ethan asked, his voice eerily calm. "The part where your ex-boyfriend drove you to the hospital? The part where he was by your side for hours before I could get there? Or the part where you gave him our daughter to hold first?" "You're making too much of this," I said, though doubt had begun to creep in. "It was a crazy moment. I wasn't thinking clearly." "That's the problem, Natalie. In your most instinctive, unguarded moment, when you weren't thinking, you chose him, not me. Him." "It wasn't a choice," I protested. "It just happened." "Things don't just happen. You've been choosing Julian over me in 1,000 small ways since before we were married. I just didn't want to see it." "That's not true," I insisted, though even as I said it, memories started surfacing. Julian's texts I'd answered during date nights, lunches with Julian I'd neglected to mention, inside jokes Ethan wasn't part of. "Isn't it?" Ethan stood up. "Tell me honestly, Natalie. If Julian had been single all this time, would you have married me?" The question caught me so off guard that I couldn't answer immediately. That slight hesitation was all the confirmation Ethan needed. "I thought so," he said quietly. The next morning, I woke to find Ethan packing a suitcase. "What are you doing?" I asked, panic rising in my throat. "I can't do this," he said simply. "I can't pretend anymore." "Pretend what?" "Ethan, you're being ridiculous. You can't leave. We have a newborn." "I know exactly what we have," he replied, his calm unnerving, "and exactly what we don't." He zipped the suitcase and looked around the room one last time. "I'll stay in contact about the baby. My lawyer will be in touch about everything else." "Lawyer?" I echoed, stunned. "You're talking about divorce because of one mistake?" "This wasn't one mistake, Natalie. This was just the culmination of a pattern that's existed our entire relationship. I've been competing with Julian from day one, and I finally realized it's a competition I can't win. Maybe I never could." "Ethan, please," I begged, tears streaming down my face. "We can fix this. We can go to counseling." "Would you cut Julian out of your life entirely?" he asked directly. "Because that's what it would take. Complete removal. No contact, no exceptions." I hesitated again, and he nodded as if confirming something to himself. That's what I thought. He was gone before the baby woke for her morning feed. In a panic, I called Julian. He arrived quickly, concern evident on his face. What happened? Ethan left, I sobbed. He's talking about divorce. This is insane. We just had a baby. Julian held me while I cried, which only confirmed everything Ethan had said. Even in this moment of crisis, I'd turned to Julian first. The divorce proceedings moved with shocking speed. Ethan was generous with financial arrangements, but adamant about one thing. Julian could not be present during his parenting time. He requested a detailed custody schedule that outlined exactly when he would see his daughter and under what conditions. 3 weeks after Ethan left, I received a call from his lawyer. There was an issue they needed to discuss in person. When I arrived at the office, Ethan was there, looking like he hadn't slept in days. "What's this about?" I asked, anxiety churning in my stomach. Ethan's lawyer cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Mr. Evans has requested a paternity test." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What? Why would you—" "Because I need to know." Ethan cut in, his voice strained. "I need to know if I'm raising another man's child." "How dare you?" I hissed. "You know I never cheated on you." "Do I?" he countered. "Because from where I'm standing, your relationship with Julian has crossed so many lines, I honestly don't know what to believe anymore." The accusation was outrageous, insulting, and yet a small voice in the back of my mind whispered a question I'd been suppressing. What about that night? 9 months before our daughter was born, Ethan had been away at a conference. Julian and I had met for dinner to celebrate his promotion. We'd had too much wine. He'd walked me home. I remembered leaning against him in the elevator, laughing at something he'd said. I remembered him helping me with my keys, coming inside to make sure I was okay. The rest was foggy, fragments of conversation on my couch, Julian's face close to mine, a moment of tension. And then waking up the next morning alone, fully clothed, with a splitting headache and gaps in my memory. I'd convinced myself nothing had happened. Julian never mentioned it, and I was too embarrassed to bring it up. But now, faced with Ethan's demand for a paternity test, that night loomed large in my consciousness. "Fine," I said finally, "do the test. But this is the last insult I'll take from you, Ethan." The testing process was clinical and cold. Cheek swabs for Ethan and the baby, sent to a lab for analysis. The 5 days of waiting were excruciating. I found myself studying my daughter's features obsessively, looking for Ethan's nose, his ears, his chin. I also found myself avoiding Julian's calls for the first time ever, letting them go to voicemail, responding with brief texts that offered no opening for conversation. The results came on a Tuesday morning. Ethan asked me to meet him at the lawyer's office again. His face told me everything before he even handed me the envelope. "Just tell me," I whispered. "I'm not her biological father," he said, his voice breaking on the last word. The world tilted sickeningly. "That's impossible," I said automatically. "There must be some mistake." "They ran it twice," Ethan said dully. "There's no mistake." In that moment, the full weight of what this meant crashed down on me. If Ethan wasn't the father, then Julian. "I didn't know," I said desperately. "Ethan, you have to believe me. I didn't know." He looked at me then, really looked at me, his eyes searching mine. "Maybe you didn't know for certain," he conceded after a long moment. "But I think part of you suspected. I think that's why you've kept him so close, why you let him into every part of our lives, why you gave our daughter, his daughter, to him first." I couldn't speak, couldn't deny it, because the truth was crashing over me in waves. That night had never been as innocent as I'd pretended. Some part of me had known it was possible, had deliberately not examined the timeline too closely when I discovered I was pregnant. "What happens now?" I finally asked, my voice small. "Now you tell Julian he's a father," Ethan said, standing up. "The divorce will be adjusted to reflect the new circumstances. I need some time to process this." "Ethan," I called as he turned to leave. "I'm sorry, I truly am." He paused at the door. "So am I, Natalie, for both of us." Telling Julian was its own special hell. I asked him to meet me at a park, neutral ground, away from the baby. When I told him the test results, he sat in stunned silence. "Are you sure?" he finally asked. "The test is conclusive," I said. "You're her father." He ran his hands through his hair, eyes wide with shock. "Nat, I'm not ready for this. I'm not father material." The irony was bitter on my tongue. "You seemed pretty comfortable playing the role when you thought she was Ethan's," I said sharply. His flinch told me I'd hit a nerve. "That was different," he muttered. "I was just being supportive." "Were you?" I challenged. "Or did you like the idea of being involved in my life, in my family, without any of the actual responsibility?" "That's not fair," he protested. "None of this is fair," I shot back. "Not to me, not to Ethan, and certainly not to my daughter. But here we are." Julian asked for time to process the news, to figure out what role he wanted to play in his daughter's life. I agreed, but inside, a cold realization was forming. Julian had never wanted a commitment. He'd wanted proximity, influence, the emotional benefits of our connection without the burden of obligation. Ethan, meanwhile, had wanted a family, had committed fully to being a husband and father, and I'd systematically undermined that commitment at every turn. The divorce was finalized when my daughter was 4 months old. Julian eventually agreed to financial support and occasional visitation, but made it clear he wasn't ready for full parenthood. Ethan, against all odds, requested visitation rights as well. "She may not be my biological child," he explained when I questioned this, "but for 4 months, I thought she was my daughter. I loved her as my daughter. I can't just turn that off." His compassion, his capacity for love despite betrayal, made my actions seem all the more shameful by comparison. My daughter is 8 months old now. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of early morning when she's nursing and the world is still, I look at her perfect face and think about the chains of decisions that brought us here. I think about boundaries ignored, respect denied, love taken for granted. I think about Ethan, who would have been an extraordinary father to our child if she had been ours, who tried to express his legitimate concerns and was consistently dismissed as jealous or controlling, who was right all along about the threat Julian posed to our marriage. I think about Julian, who played at domesticity when it suited him but balked at actual commitment, who was happy to insert himself into my marriage but retreated when faced with real responsibility. And I think about myself, how I justified every boundary crossed, how I prioritized a past connection over a present commitment, how I mistook Ethan's desire for appropriate boundaries as control. They say a moment of truth comes in every crisis. Mine came too late, in a hospital room, handing my newborn to the wrong man first. What seemed like a small gesture was actually the final breach of trust, in a marriage already fractured by 1,000 tiny betrayals. If there's anything I've learned from this wreckage, it's that boundaries exist for a reason. Not because of insecurity or jealousy or control, but because respect demands them. Trust requires them. Love honors them. I learned this lesson at the highest possible cost. I just hope my daughter won't have to pay for my mistakes for the rest of her life.